All right, so there's been a question. Sadie asked me to have a talk about why I refuse mtronic. And this is a long story, so bear with me. This all stems from when the 660s first started getting phased out, and 661 was a brand new thing. Everybody was talking about what hot rods they were, and a lot of us good old boys couldn't afford one. I couldn't afford one. So I kept running what I had for some time, and I finally got my hands on one, and the thing was a turd. And it was a very early 660, but it was a turd. It was hard starting, constantly had fuel pickup issues. There was issues with all the rubber components, the intake manifolds, the fuel lines, every bunch of junk having to do with it. And the thing, considering it's supposed to tune itself, it's very difficult to diagnose problems because it literally would just tune itself as much as it can, and it masks problems that cause catastrophic failures like air leaks. Air leaks ruin a saw in a very short order of time. I mean, you want to know, ask Sadie. Her very first saw that I put in her hands out here in the woods, I had been running it for some time with an air leak that I couldn't track down, and it was a Husky, a 390, and the little plastic flange that goes from the intake manifold to the carburetor that the carburetor screws to had a crack in it from me tightening those screws a little too tight. Thing leaked air. I finally figured out what it was. I fixed it. I gave her the saw, and the thing blew up like, 2 weeks into her cutting. So that's common, an air leak. But what it is if you don't know you have an air leak, it doesn't matter how much fuel you pour into that thing. If you're sucking air, that thing is going to blow. It is a ticking time bomb. These power saws, 2-stroke engines, are not supposed to have vacuum air leaks anywhere. So that's number one. It masks problems that are easy to diagnose if you know a single thing about your power saw, and if you know how they're supposed to run, and if you tune them yourself and you know how to tune them yourself. So there's number one. Number two, those carburetors cost more than twice as much as a standard carburetor to replace. Okay, so there's number two, cost. Number three, cost to rebuild. See, now this is a regular carb rebuild kit for, what is it? A K10WJ. So it's a Walbro for a MS660. Just picked this up at Madsen's. I couldn't find the invoice for it. Couldn't have been more than 20 bucks. I think they're like $14, and this is all the parts that comes in it. That's it. That's all it takes to rebuild a carburetor. It takes me 5 minutes, sometimes less because I don't pull the Welsh plugs every time. So, I mean, it literally is a 5-minute job to rebuild a carburetor. The mtronic carburetor has a solenoid, and that solenoid is the fuel control instead of having screws and a needle. It has that solenoid. That solenoid regularly packs up with grime. It is not possible to clean, and when it fails, that solenoid itself, I can't remember what it is, $40 to $60. I think I've paid as much as $80 for one when I'm in an emergency and I can't afford to go to Madsen's or call Madsen's. I just need it now. So cost to rebuild, time to rebuild. Okay, there's electronics there. It's fine stuff. You got to pull this stupid little switch off and tape it open. I think that it's just awful issues. The other one is that once that solenoid starts going bad, the carburetor won't hold vacuum anymore or pressure, and so all the fuel drains all the way out of the thing every single time that you shut it off and leave it set for any longer than about, 5-10 minutes. And so then you get no fuel pickup. You got to choke the saw again. You got to restart the saw again. You got to, that stupid tuning, like, oh yeah, okay, let me just run my saw wide open throttle for an amount of time. Like, that's awful. And the fact that that's okay illustrates my next issue with 661s, which is the advance on the flywheel and the coil, which is that the thing will blubber like hell. I can tune it to exactly, guess what I carry in my pocket? Everywhere I go, every day I go to work, I carry this in my pocket. See, it lives there. Okay, so I tuned my saws straight to 13,000, 12,950 right in the wheelhouse. And then that very same 661, I dog that thing up into the wood and it advances. All you need to do is pull it back out of the wood. I mean, just a sliver. And that thing's bouncing off the limiter. So everybody, oh, Sadie's an idiot, bouncing her saw off the rev limiter. You guys are fools who've never tuned a saw, and you guys are fools that don't understand how these idiotic things run. A 390 doesn't do that, a 395 doesn't do that, a 660 doesn't do that, a 461, a 460. A saw without that stupid timing advance and a saw without mtronics does not do that. They don't. I could put any saw in Sadie's hands. I tell her to run them wide open throttle. You know why? Because they run at wide open throttle. They don't do that. They run as they're supposed to. That still has a problem. That's my issue there. So the next one is unreliable. That mtronics is unreliable. It fails all the time. When it fails, it's usually right in the middle when you need it. It's usually an emergency, right? Because this job, you guys haven't noticed, it's a little bit more dangerous than cutting some firewood, homie. So I cannot afford to have a piece of equipment that my life regularly depends on fail on me right when I freaking need it to. And when it fails, I need to be able to have one of these sitting in my damn tool shed so that way I can go and replace it whenever in the heck I need to. I can rebuild that machine. So that's my gripes. I'm a little deeper into it than you guys probably wanted. That's a little bit into the weeds. I've been talking for 6 minutes here. Sadie might edit this down into a 1-minute video. She might not. This has been a long time coming because nobody seems to understand. And part of it is that I'm not sure that any of these guys that like, well, I've been running mine just fine for a long time. Like, I don't know how often you guys run them, for one. I don't know how much you run them. I abuse my tools, absolutely. Their only job is to make me money. I abuse the absolute crap out of this 660 right here. I've abused the absolute snot out of my 390s, my 395s. I've got a 395 that's 6 years old. I've got another one that's 5, another one that's 3. I've got a 390 that's still 6 years old. That was one of Gordy from West Coast Saw. That was one of his very first hot rods that he ever built, was one of those 390s. And I run the out of them. And they're still going just fine. You know why? Because when they got air leaks, I sort them out as best I can. I try and get on top of stuff. I abuse them, but they're made to be abused. When stuff don't run right and comes apart, I'm telling you, there's a problem, and I mean it. I ain't just a joke out here. I've been running these things a long time. There's a problem with these piece of junks. So, and then that's the next one with the 500i. Everybody that runs a 500i that I know, the thing's hard starting. The screens are always white. White. You know what an exhaust screen is supposed to be colored? It's supposed to be colored a really light tan, like the color of tea, like really weak tea. That's the color your exhaust screens are supposed to be, with a perfect fuel mixture. And those 500i's run white hot. They bounce off the limiter, they run lean. I can tell that they're lean by the way that they start, and when I grab a hold of the throttle, it stutters a little bit, it sucks air. That's because it's not tuned right. That is not proper. With my regular carb saws, I tune them with a screwdriver. Plain old redneck with an ear can find where that thing belongs, where when you grab that throttle, it picks right up. It doesn't sputter because it's choked out with too much fuel, and it doesn't starve and try and suck some air and die. So that's the main reason why. If you know how to tune a saw, then there's no reason to run mtronic. If you don't know how to tune a saw, and especially if you're a light user of power saws, that's fine. That's a great saw for a light user. I think that's great. But to call that the replacement for the MS660 or for the 066 is absolutely a joke. That is not a replacement for a commercial saw. It has power. That saw, a 661, well-tuned, and in the peak of its career, its operating lifespan, has more power, raw horsepower, than almost any machine that I've ever held. Does it have the same torque as a 395? No, never. 395 has a crankcase this freaking wide. It moves too much air, even though they're the same class of saw. They're both 5.5 cube saws. A 395 runs like a 6-cube saw. It always has, it always will. That was a replacement for a 2100. 661, that's a replacement for a 660 or an 066. They're not the same class of saw. So a 395, bigger, heavier, bigger crankcase, bigger crank counterweight, heavier everything. That thing's got torque that a 661 cannot dream of. But the 661, I'm not taking it from it, has incredible horsepower when it's running properly. But they just aren't built to be durable. The mtronic is not a system that I think was ever designed to be for the professional chainsaw user. Now, tree service guy, that's a professional chainsaw user. That's a guy who uses a saw and gets paid to do it. That's the definition of a pro. I get it. Not trying to take it from you guys. But I run my saws for 6.5 hours of mostly wide open throttle. Like you guys see a tiny snapshot on the internet, but it's literally stopping only for fuel, rarely for a drink. Sometimes to size something up, but most of the time I'm sizing stuff up as I'm walking from tree to tree. I'll shut my saw off and throw it on my shoulder to carry it from where I just bucked a log to where I got to fall another tree, etc., etc. But it's short spans. Like I bet you I've got probably solid 6 hours and 15 minutes, 6 hours and 10 minutes on the saw every day, and maybe 15 to 20 minutes of carrying the saw around places and fueling up in a day. So these saws literally, they get to their service requirement, 300 hours of runtime in, I don't know, let me think. What's 7 times what is 300? Like, because we work 70 hours every 2 weeks, right? 35 hours a week, 70 hours every 2 weeks, 140 hours a week. So literally 3 or 4 months, and this thing's at its 300-hour service requirement to even meet emission standards. Well, I get it. You don't have to do that, but with these saws you do, right? My 660, this thing has been through a California season down in a burn, cutting hammer freaking monster wood in super high elevation, which is hard to tune for. Heavily abused, the same as all my other tools. And now it's got a full Oregon winter season, which is notorious for me not doing my maintenance the way I'm supposed to. Air filters getting a little too dirty, too clogged up too often. Water going through the carbs, water in my fuel. You know, just various things that are hard on a saw. I do that. You know, saws getting left in a unit because it's 1,400 feet deep, and then when I finish, I bounce to the bottom like saws that don't come home, and when they do come home, it's pouring rain like a freaking 2-cootered cow on a flat rock. Like, I'm not going to do maintenance out there in that. And so they get abused some. But guess what? That thing still, I can dangle it off of its starter rope. It still has compression. It still runs fine. It has no problems. It's getting close to a carb rebuild. That's why I just bought this one. It's close. It needs it. It's getting where it's a little bit finicky. Where my low and my idle, both, I'm having a hard time getting them comfortable, and it's a combination of my clutch, springs, and clutch itself, centrifugal clutch, starting to get a little wore out. They're rubbing on the drum too much, so it's hard to tune for. And that carb, it's probably getting to where it needs a new needle more than anything. A new needle and a new metering lever. I probably don't even need to change a single other thing in that carb other than this tiny little guy right here. That's called a needle. And then this little guy right here, that's a metering lever. I changed those 2 parts. I guarantee you that saw is like brand new again. These 661s, they still have pretty good compression, although most of them have white screens from doing that really weird timing advance thing. And that's hard to tune for, damn near impossible, right? 13,000 RPMs is plenty. That's what they're supposed to run at, 13,000. Some guys push it, some guys don't. I'm a don't push it guy anymore because I like my stuff to last longer. These things still have some compression. That's pretty durable for a jug and piston for a saw that runs that incredibly lean. So I'm not trying to take that from it. It's just everything else. The wheels fall off of the darn thing. It's like a Cummins in a Dodge, right? I got Dodges. We got Dodges. It's a great motor. It's a great motor, but the wheels fall off, right? It's just the same thing. I'm not saying that you got to hate Stihl like me. I hate them, right? Because they promise to be the best, the highest quality for the professional user, but it's literally a hot piece of junk that they sell for more money than a Husky that lasts longer. I don't know why I ever switched. I just thought it sounded like a good idea. They got the Euro carb kit here. I begged for them to do that like 12 years ago, and they told me that they make enough money off of string trimmers and mowers. They don't give a darn about log cutters anymore. So they weren't going to change anything. And then lo and behold, a bunch of people switched to Husky, and a bunch of people said, kind of forget this, we're done with Stihl. And then they brought Euro carbs to America. So I thought I'd give it a try. It's still not a good saw. It's not a good upgrade. The 461, that's one of the finest upgrade saws ever built. That is obviously better than a 460. Just an incredible saw. And if they could have done that to the 660, we would be someplace. But then what do? They cancel the 461 for the 462 and the 500i. It's going down a road that I don't like. So Husky's going that way. People are saying that I can still get a 585 or a 585, I think it is, yeah. Which is probably a good saw. I ran 385s for a long time. I had 2 of them, and they were pretty good. I can't tell the difference between one and a 390 when I'm running them. I mean, really. I think a lot of it, the hot rod saw fad, like I grew out of it, and I think when guys grow out of it, they kind of feel the same way. It's like when I was inexperienced and I was a sloppy cutter, I needed that. I needed that horsepower to get me out of a tight spot. Often I was a slob. I had to cut corners off. I had to kind of do some things that you shouldn't do, and you needed horsepower to get it done. But then the older you get and the better you get and the more you learn how to actually cut and not be a slob, you don't need that horsepower as much because you just do cleaner work, and you've seen more, you've done more, you've got a better idea of the outcome and possible outcomes, where I can call the worst possible outcome before I even do something and decide if that's acceptable. And if it's not acceptable, then I'll select a different way to do it instead of trying to rely on horsepower to get me out of something that may or may not work anyway and might get you hurt. So that's why I don't run hot rod saws as well anymore, because if you do clean work, if you do really good work, you don't need it. And I trust me, we're gonna get plenty of argument from old timers. That's great. You guys are entitled to your opinion, but every single one of you can bring the hottest rod saw out anytime, and I will cut tree for tree with you, and we'll cut for scale, and we'll see who puts more on the ground. The bottom line is clean work wins against hot rod saw in sloppy hands. And that's just the bottom line. You get a really good cutter with a hot rod saw, yeah, sure, he'll smoke me. But then that saw is gonna last half as long, and I'm a little easier on my equipment than you guys think I am, because I'm hard on it, but I'm as hard on it as it allows. So anyway, that's a lot of stuff. I could go on and on about this because I really do. I love this job. I love this industry. I love playing with my tools, man. I love working on them. I love playing with them. I love when they run right. I have bad days when they don't. I love tuning chains. I love a good sharp chain. When I grind a bunk one that has lumps in it, I have a bad day, same as everybody. So it's just one of those things. I could go on and on about it all day and get blue in the face and all that good stuff, but I think we'll cut it off here. That's plenty. You guys can ruminate on it and argue with me and argue amongst yourselves, and hey, it'll just be an open invitation. And there's a handful of the old timers that like I say, you got to be somebody first before you can be a has-been. So I'm not going to call them has-beens. Probably the dum-dums of the group, the guys that really liked to drink antifreeze when they were a kid, when they learned there was glycerin in it, had a little sweet taste to it. Hey, any one of you guys, you want to come out on one of my jobs someday, and you and me will cut tree for tree, and we will see whose body parts are dragging behind them on the walk to the truck at the end of the day, and we'll just see what's up. Because not the best in the world, but I can cut side by side with the best and have their respect at the end of the day. I've known some of the best. You know why I know that? Because I've cut with some of the best ever to live, and those guys are legends, and they respect me the same as I respect them. So most of the guys who don't, I take it with a grain of salt, because you guys are probably culls anyway, and you didn't have any friends when you were cutting. So anyway, enough about that. You guys all have a great day. It's Friday. Look, Sadie's out here laughing at me. If you can make your wife laugh at you and pick on you, like that's a good day. You guys have a good dinner. Have a good Friday. Stay safe. Don't drink and drive. Don't beat up on each other. Don't beat up on your wives. All that good stuff. It's a good day if you can keep yourselves under some kind of control. And but just remember, if you do drink too much, make sure to come and argue in the comments, because that's usually, I can literally watch when somebody's had like a few beers and it's like, Billy Bob came back out again. Anyway, you guys have a good one. We'll see you another time.